Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
The DMZ in new digs. It's all different around here.
It is different, and it's a good it's a good point to make. There may be some people who are watching who are fans or subscribers to my YouTube channel who are getting this for the first time. You and I have been having these conversations for over a dozen years at bloggingheads.tv and at their YouTube channel. We're migrating it here. So if you're subscribed to Matt Lewis on YouTube, you'll be getting these every week or so, every other week sometimes. But Bill Scher, you need no introduction anywhere in the civilized world. But for those people that don't know you yet, tell us about
just
you.
in case. Um, I started blogging literally 20 years ago at a site that I created called liberaloasis.com. I later became a blogger for a progressive group called Campaign for America's Future. While I was there, I did some other freelance writing, which led me to be a contributing editor at Politico magazine and a contributor at Real Clear Politics. I still am affiliated with both publications, but most of my writing these days, I left Campaign for America's Future around 2016, and most of my writing these days is at the Washington Monthly.
And so, people who are familiar with my podcast, which I sometimes post on YouTube, know that generally I have civil conversations. Sometimes it's with people I agree with. Sometimes it's with people I disagree with. You come from the left side of the spectrum. I come from the right side of the spectrum. And this DMZ thing that we've been doing now for a long time, the model is that it's like a civil conversation.
Mhm.
But Bill, we're going to test that this week.
yeah. But this is abortion is always our more challenging episodes, and probably this week more than ever. But for those who aren't familiar with us, we even when it's a subject like abortion, one of the reasons why we can have a conversation is that we know we're not going to convince the other to change their minds about abortion. And so that's not going to be the primary focus of what we talk about today.
Yes, that's a fair and beneficial caveat.
But I do want to ask you this, Matt.
Yeah.
Is this the greatest week of your life? Are you just floating on air that you appear to be on the cusp of overturning Roe v. Wade? Often when we talk, I mean, you've been down. You've been down when Democrats are in the presidency. You've been down when Trump is in the presidency sometimes. So we have often talked in recent years about your struggles with being a conservative in the world as it is situated. But is this not the culmination of everything you've ever wanted?
Well, so you make a valid point, Bill, which is I do think that this issue has been probably the dominant political issue my whole life. For almost 50 years, this has been the hot button issue, the holy grail of certainly of conservative politics. And I'll say personally, there are a lot of things that I care about in politics, and I would say I'm a broad spectrum conservative. But this issue to me, and it doesn't mean that I don't think that we should have some exceptions or whatever, but generally speaking, the right to life has been the issue that has animated me in my involvement in politics, where I really feel like this is kind of a cause and something that is we're on the right side, certainly of this issue. But I do have to say, because of the way this thing came down, it's been complicated. So first of all, I like to get my sleep. So I like it when Supreme Court decisions are handed down in the morning, not at 9:30 at night. So that was a little weird, and it got me a little riled up. But also the fact that it's not official, Bill. I mean, it certainly seems like this was a final draft that Alito wrote, and it seems like whatever the motives were of somebody who leaked it, some people think that it was an attempt to cement in the position of the five judges who are voting to overturn Roe. Other people think it's somebody on the left. Whatever the case may be, the fact that it was leaked, I feel like it sort of ruined the celebration that I might otherwise have. It cast a pall over what would have been, I think, very celebratory.
I'm sorry you're going through this, Matt.
It's been tough, Bill.
Let me ask you about this, because you wrote a piece at the Daily Beast warning Roberts not to, essentially go only 3/4 of the way in this decision, where you only uphold Mississippi's 15-week ban, but you don't flat out overturn Roe. And when you wrote that, like, my gut reaction was, are conservatives actually worried somehow this is not going to work out that the way they wanted to? All the indications are already pointing towards, I mean, again, if not Roe being flat overturned, severely gutted to the point where you would flick it off, somewhere soon down the line. And now there is this theory, the speculation that the leak is coming from the right side of the House inside the Supreme Court chamber, because they're worried that someone's getting wobbly, and they need to put it out there that if you've basically said the warning shot, hey, if you decamp with Kavanaugh, Barrett, Gorsuch, if you go decamp with John Roberts and do some kind of Casey controlling opinion nonsense here, it's going to be on record that you flipped. So what I'm curious is, when you wrote the piece initially, where did that come from? Like, where is this notion in conservative circles that there's something to worry about here on the right? And does that inform your opinion about where this leak might be coming from now?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's just a good practice to never dance before you're in the end zone, which is to say, I think it's wise of conservatives or people who want to overturn Roe to not take it for granted that it was going to happen. And there is a history, of course, of John Roberts changing his mind, and specifically with the case of the Obamacare. And he did it.
He's never admitted that, but it has been reported that he was once in the majority to strike it down, and then he moved and wrote his very nuanced controlling opinion that kept Obamacare on the books.
So
but of course, Roberts not the one to change it. The reporting is that Roberts is not in the majority right now.
Well, there's I mean, the difference is that there are more conservative justices now, and so it's not enough for Roberts to switch this time. Roberts would have to switch and get someone else to come with him. He would have to flip another Republican nominee. But there was report. So the way that this, maybe we're paranoid or maybe we're picking up on intel. It's unclear whether this was, paranoia or intel. But the Wall Street Journal did an editorial, I think last week, where they embedded in the editorial this idea that John Roberts may be working assiduously to flip either Kavanaugh or Barrett. And keep in mind, they wouldn't be flipping to be pro-abortion, right? They would have been, the flip would be, we're going to uphold the Mississippi 15-week ban, but stop short of overturning Roe. So you could potentially make a case that that would be a conservative thing to do, and it would advance the conservative cause or the pro-life cause, but it would stop short of actually overturning Roe. My column argued, apparently when Roberts flipped or changed his mind during Obamacare, ostensibly the reason he did that was to preserve the reputation and the credibility and the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And I make the argument in that column at the Daily Beast that if that's what he cares about, this wouldn't serve that end. This would actually undermine that cause. And so that's what I wrote about.
But why would the Wall Street Journal write that editorial? I mean, we have all this talk right now about the common talking point amongst Republicans is who cares what's in this opinion? Who cares that Roe v. Wade might be on the verge of being overturned? This leak is an abomination. This is the left trying to destroy the legitimacy of the court. Isn't it possible that even before this point, somebody inside the court was yabbering to the Wall Street Journal editorial board? And again, we already have an example of a leak trying to pillory John Roberts on his Obamacare ruling. Isn't there some evidence here that there are people inside the Supreme Court who have been eagerly trying to pull back the veil and discredit Roberts and perhaps other center-right justices?
Well, so I think the leak is a big deal and it's very problematic. I don't think it's the lead. I don't think it's the it's not my big takeaway. Is not the leak. Having said that, it's the leak. You could make an argument the leak came from the left. You could make an argument the leak came from the right. But I will say it's not crazy to think that my Daily Beast column, which was picking up on, rumors that John Roberts is trying to find a middle ground and flip or bring with him, I would think Brett Kavanaugh would be the most likely. Mm-hmm. It's not absurd to think that the same person who leaked that rumor, which was probably true, to the Wall Street Journal may have also been the person or among the people on the right who leaked the decision, and the goal would be to freeze it in place and to basically sound the alarm, watch out, and freeze things in place, and maybe also if Kavanaugh or Barrett were thinking about doing this, maybe they would think twice.
Well, let us proceed further in the hypothetical that this is going to be the ruling.
Yeah, I think again, you don't count your chickens before they hatch, and if you're a conservative who's been trying to overturn Roe, we've been burned many times. The Casey decision in 1992, pro-lifers were very optimistic that, in fact, that Roe would be overturned then, and of course it was not. And so, I don't want to celebrate early, but I will say, Bill, as an analyst, if I were predicting, I would predict that this will stand.
Okay, well, just before we then do further analysis on the premise that it stands, if it doesn't at this point, if somehow we do get a Roberts-Kavanaugh controlling opinion that Mississippi law stands, but these other elements of Roe Casey stand too, what does that do to the conservative movement in the Republican Party?
That's a great question. I think you could make an argument that it won't have much effect. That one argument would be
the expectations have now just completely gone through the roof. I mean, if the leak hadn't happened and you had a controlling opinion, I think it would be different than now that we're post-leak and you got conservatives spiking the ball, owning the libs, running the victory laps.
It would hurt more if we were teased. And then it's like Lucy with the football, right? Like if we got this close after 50 years, this close to finally achieving this huge goal, and then Roberts pulled the ball away at the last minute, it would hurt more than if the decision were just handed down. Because I think, again, worst case scenario for conservatives is that the Mississippi 15-week ban stands, and that would certainly be a dramatic improvement if that became precedent. That would be
so you, Matt Lewis, would take the 3/4 loaf and not be too upset.
Well, I'm not going to say I wouldn't be too upset, but I think it would be an incremental gain. But the problem, as you, I think, have sussed out, Bill, is that because now we've been teased with getting to the promised land, it would be I would say the outcome politically, I don't know that there would be a huge outcome, and I don't think it would be demoralizing to the point where pro-lifers would abandon hope and give up. But the anger that would be directed at someone like a John Roberts and a Brett Kavanaugh, if it were Brett Kavanaugh, would be much more intense than it otherwise would have been had this not leaked out, right? So that would tend to reinforce the notion that the leak could have come from the right.
Okay, so let's say this opinion essentially stays as it is. Roe's overturned in a month and a half's time. Now, one theme of yours that always comes up in our conversations is often in politics, winning is losing and losing is winning. Do you have concern? I mean, you said to me earlier just in the show that you're generally opposed to abortion, but you're willing to have exceptions. We know that there are conservatives that are not super great at keeping it inside and finding some acceptable, upper bound of how far they should go. We've already seen bills that don't have exceptions for rape and incest. We've already seen people go for flat out bans or 6-week bans, not just in deep red states, but in purplish states. Do you have any concern that Republicans won't find a way to win this gracefully and cleverly and not run the risk of taking things too far and giving Democrats the opportunity to turn the tables?
Yeah, so I would say first, with this issue, and I'm not shaming you for talking about politics. That's what we do here. But in this issue, my primary concern is philosophical and doing the right thing. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, we know what this Republican Party, we know what this current iteration of the Republican Party looks like and what it is. And so the idea that some states are going to do some crazy things that may be counterproductive, that's certainly open. The interesting thing is, Bill, overturning Roe will not ban abortion. It would send it back to the states. And so we could end up having many fights over the country. And there'll be some states that will be very hard, if not impossible, to get an abortion. And some states where you could get an abortion like the day that you give birth, partial birth abortion, as it were. And so the good thing about that is that because of our federalist system, we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach, and so I think that that it lets out some steam. We're not trying to force everyone in the country to comport to this one. And in fact, that was the problem. One of the problems with Roe is that Roe sought to force everyone in the country into the same paradigm. But the downside of federalism, I think, is that we're going to have a whole bunch of fights all over that could be divisive. And, kind of on top of that, we're going to have, we've been talking about this civil war in America. Well, it's like red states and blue states. There are two Americas. And that is going to, I think, extend the Civil War metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I make one preamble here, because I know when we talk about abortion and we talk about it in political terms, it can be irritating. I do think the politics are really important here. I mean, the politics greatly impact the policy. If from a Republican pro-life standpoint, if you misplay the politics and you get a big backlash, I mean, you may lose major ground in a lot of purple states, maybe in some red states. I mean, look, we've had anti-abortion referendums lose in South Dakota, in North Dakota, in Mississippi. We've had Senate candidates with far-right positions lose winnable Senate races in Indiana and Missouri. This is all in the past 10 plus years. So if you get it wrong, if you get the politics wrong, not just that Democrats might win an election cycle, that they may win elections for governor, for state legislatures that can change state policies, that they can win Senate races that allow judges to be confirmed, and how those judges might end up replacing, Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas won't live forever if they go at a certain point when Democrats are in control. This upcoming opinion may not stand. So I think the politics has great relevance here. It's not just about talking about horse race stuff.
Yeah, and I would say so. First of all, politics is important. It's not trivial. But second of all, if you don't want to hear people talk about politics and horse race stuff, go somewhere else. Like that's what we do. That's part of what we do. And we're now on day 2 or 3 of this story as well. So, I think that there's a little now is the time. And we just had an election last night. Well, we've got an election coming up here in West Virginia a week from yesterday. So on May 10th. We have a race coming up, and
we should talk about that.
Yeah,
because Manchin's getting in that Republican primary.
Yeah.
We should talk about that. But obviously we have more to talk about abortion.
Should we talk about it? I guess we should talk. We can put a pin in it for right now, but I'm guessing we should talk about it this week, right? Because next week it will be too late.
I think we should do a little on that. But I want to get back to something else you said about is this going to reignite civil war? Is it going to allow people to sort of sort themselves out in the corners that they want to be in? I most certainly think it's the former. And I thought there's plenty of parts of the Alito opinion that I thought were terrible. But the notion that Roe inflamed the Civil War with the implication that getting rid of it is sort of getting rid of the irritant, I just think is totally fantastical. This is going to reignite culture war like you've never seen, because it's not like there are 25 blue states that want to be blue and 25 red states that want to be red, and they're going to make their own decisions. Everyone's going to be happy with where they're sitting in the country. Number one, there are a lot of purple states. there are a lot of purple states that have Republican governments right now who are really going to be on the hot seat. And as I said, it may be that if you're in a deep red state, the Republican could still take it too far and cause a backlash, because no state's 100% anything. And once things get real, once you have a situation where people can get arrested, that can change political calculations. And of course, we're already hearing rumblings about Republicans wanting to pass federal legislation to ban abortions nationally, which obviously impacts things no matter where you sit in the country. So I just think it is inescapable that you're taking an issue which I would argue, as far as culture war fights go, generally stays on a low simmer, except when Republicans push things like 6-week abortion bans, and you're going to make this a complete culture war inferno. So if your actual goal is to sort of calm the nation, I don't think this is going to do the trick.
Well, so I do think that the Roe decision initially short-circuited the democratic process, and that had the democratic process been allowed to play out organically, without 9, I think at the time, dudes in robes, yeah, definitely, without them sort of intervening and stopping that organic process, we may have come to some sort of compromise or consensus positions on this issue, right? So in a sense, they hit pause on that, and I think you're right, though, in the sense that it's not going to work itself out. Now we're going to have to go through that struggle and that fight at the state level, at least and it's not necessarily going to be pretty, and it's not necessarily going to be calm. Politics is about ideas, but it's also about struggle. It's also a battle, as long as it's a battle at the ballot box or among activism, the legitimate political process. It's not necessarily bad. As long as violence is not involved. I would say that I think the abortion issue, though, is not as potent as it used to be, which means it may not be as divisive as it used to be. I mean, I feel like other issues now, like critical race theory or the trans argument, the trans debate, have transcended the abortion issue. And
I mean,
now it may
I
be
think,
that this
yeah,
changes
I think
that.
any polling on that, you could look at, say, Texas and say, hey, Texas did a 6-week ban, and like they're going about their business.
Well, I was
I mean,
surprised that the Texas ban, because I wrote a piece last July for some reason that I think I think somebody at the Beast updated something very minor. It looks like maybe a grammatical thing, but it says it was December, but it was actually I wrote something like in July of 2021, where I think I might be like the first person that I know of that said like, "Hey, Roe will probably be overturned next year, and this could change everything we know about the midterms." But after I wrote that, the Texas thing happened, and it didn't. MSNBC went crazy, Twitter went crazy, but it didn't really seem to change the electoral landscape at all.
well, one, I think we don't quite know that yet because we haven't had a full blown election since then. Two, I mean, the the chance that it would not completely upend politics, I think, is contingent upon how easily is abortion still accessible no matter where you are in the country. When prohibition happened in 1919, a lot of people still got their alcohol anyway. People just flouted the law to the point where it got so ridiculous that 13 years later, people said this is a stupid amendment, and they actually repealed it. If you can still get abortion pills in Texas or wherever, if you can still cross a state line to get an abortion without too much hassle, and nobody is getting arrested for doing so, then and again, I understand that there are already people in Texas who are not getting access, but it clearly hasn't reached a kind of critical mass number. And no, I mean, we had an arrest in Texas not too long ago that was illegitimate. It was not even based on the Texas law. Was that arrest legitimate?
Yeah.
For like this 24-hour period, people were starting to lose their minds, and then the local DA said, "Sorry, wrongful arrest. We apologize." So I think once you get an arrest, it's going to feel a whole lot more real because then people are going to say, wait a second.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill. The Texas law does not penalize a woman for getting an abortion. It would be someone who was providing it or providing access to it. Something.
And they made a civil penalty. It's not even supposed to be an arrest. It's supposed to be you pay $10,000 to the state or the person suing or whatever.
Bounty.
Now, I believe I'm not up on this. I believe Texas passed another law about abortion pills, and I don't know what the penalty is for that.
Yeah.
And of course, if Roe is gone, perhaps Texas then passes a fresh law that's not so cutesy, because anything goes at that point. So I think it has to feel real. It has to feel like something has truly changed, and people who could get abortions now really cannot get abortions and are at real risk of severe penalty if they do, for the politics to change here.
Well, it'll be interesting to me to see when this decision is actually handed down. It could be it could be like a month from now in June, or maybe the court will now expedite the actual. I don't know. That would be a great question for an expert. But it seems to me that now we're in this weird state of limbo, and I don't know that that's very healthy either.
Well, I mean, the interim period between now and June is not the end all be all here. It's really what happens after that. Can I raise the flip side argument? We talked a lot about how this might affect Republican political fortunes. I do think there are challenges on the Democratic side. I'm actually working on a piece right now for the Monthly. I'm not quite done with it yet, because I think there is. I think Democrats should take a long view that this is not the end of the debate. The debate is still very, very winnable, but accept that it's going to have to take a long time at this point. There's no quick fix solution to overcoming a Supreme Court loss. But my concern is, and you're already seeing rumblings of this, case in point, Kirsten Sinema had a statement saying, her support for legislation that would codify Roe, but also with a nod towards her view that we shouldn't get rid of the filibuster because the filibuster has protected women's health in other circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
That got I mean, she didn't use the word filibuster, but she said, Senate procedures, existing Senate procedures, something like that. AOC then responds on Twitter, flat out saying the filibuster is what's preventing us from codifying Roe, and you should be primaried. So, I mean, Democrats are going to have a vote on the Senate floor in days, which Manchin's, we already know, is a no vote. Manchin hasn't been for this bill codifying Roe. So that puts Democrats at 49. Maybe Collins and Murkowski come over. They didn't last time. They didn't when this came up a few months ago because they have their own bill that's not as expansive as the Democratic bill. But whether it gets to 50 or not, it's not going to be law because it's not going to get to 60, which re-triggers a whole argument about abolishing the filibuster. And the filibuster conversation goes right into the court packing conversation, because if you can abolish the filibuster to pass a law codifying abortion rights, who believes that the Supreme Court's going to uphold that law? You have to pack the Supreme Court if you want that law to stay on the books. So obviously one conversation leads right to the other, and that's not a issue where Democrats are unified. Why would you take this moment when the country, poll after poll after poll, says the majority wants to keep Roe. They may not want abortion without any restrictions at all, but they want to keep Roe. That's a point of unity for Democrats and beyond. And here would be your moment to take advantage of that and reverse the conversation. Again, not just for a short-term political game, but to win the argument, over the long haul, to be able to keep having the ability to put judges on courts. And if Democrats instead go into circular firing squad mode, that jeopardizes that opportunity.
Yeah, and it seems like. And it seems like also, Bill, I mean, as we head into the midterms, Democrats are already, I'm guessing that the people who care most about Roe are already Democrats. And they're already people who probably also want student loan forgiveness. And they're also, so this, I think the best Democrats can hope to do at the midterms is fire up their base. But I would imagine that they're, especially if they start getting into things like court packing, that they're really going to turn off a lot of kind of independent voters or more working class folks who are like, they're worried about, the average person maybe is worried about inflation. In fact, I think there was a Gallup poll or something that said, like, inflation is the number one concern and gas prices are like number two. Well, if Democrats are spending the next 3 months or whatever focused on, Roe, and student loan forgiveness, that'll fire up the base and maybe that'll protect some Democrats in D plus 15 districts that, that the Biden won. But I don't know if it's actually going to be a boon for Democrats in the midterms.
Well, I mean, yes, it's a double-edged issue.
Yeah,
because it's Republicans who have thrusted abortion onto the national agenda. It is Donald Trump who ran in 2016 on a pledge to only nominate judges who will overturn Roe. Is Republicans who got rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court justices in 2017 to get 3 judges on the court who are about to overturn Roe, and now they've overturned Roe. So it's not like Democrats made this happen. Republicans, and yes, I know about the nuclear option, Harry Reid in 2013, but there is a clear, deliberate act said out in the open to get judges on the court on narrow party line votes specifically to overturn Roe, and it would appear they're about to do that. So as much as Democrats have to worry about getting tangled up in a court packing discussion when people care primarily about inflation, Republicans are vulnerable to say, you inflamed this culture war when you should be worried about it. What are you going to do about inflation? What's your great idea? So both parties got to find a way to do what's that?
I think the headline for this could be tangled up in blue states. An homage to Bob Dylan, who might sue us, as he apparently did Hootie and the Blowfish. So we'll see.
So I think there's a lot of challenges across the board here, but considering that as it stood 3 days ago, Republicans were absolutely in the catbird seat to have a great midterm. Any new X factor is an opportunity for Democrats to change the equation. So I'm not saying Democrats can't misplay it, because they absolutely could, but from that Craven horse race standpoint, you want the opportunity to change the conversation in some way.
Yeah. As I wrote last July predicting that this could upend everything. Now I'm skeptical of that politically. I don't know if this changes anything. I think the people who are outraged by this were already the most likely people to vote. They're already in the Dem camp. Bill, let me ask you this. You mentioned Harry Reid changing the rules for filibustering lower court, lower judges, not the Supreme Court. RBG has been mentioned as someone who should have retired when Obama was president. Donald Trump, you mentioned Donald Trump. You invoked Donald Trump. Obviously, he ended up getting 3 justices nominated. But I have written and I argue that the most important figure, the person that deserves the most credit or blame for this, is Mitch McConnell. What do you think?
Well, he plays a major part. I don't know if I could. I mean, I think there's several plot points here. I mean, we had a little exchange on Twitter earlier. The fact that a band of conservative activists during the Bush presidency stopped Bush from appointing Harriet Miers to the court.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I'm not saying that I made any difference at all, but Bill, I was one of the Stop Harriet Miers voices, a lowly blogger, I think at the time at Human Events. But it was actually, when you say a band, the only person I can remember who was for Harriet Miers was Hugh Hewitt. I think it was almost a consensus position in the conservative blogosphere at the time that this is a bad nominee.
If George Bush got his way, his 2 judges would have been John Roberts and Harriet Miers.
Yep.
And Harriet Miers did not have the same conservative pedigree as Sam Alito. She had given a speech in 1993 that sounded pro-choice-ish, whereas Sam Alito literally had documentation from 1985 that he wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade. So, I mean, that was the point where conservatives said, we are done with nominees that aren't proven conservatives. We're not doing suitors anymore. We gave you John Roberts. We trusted he'd be good enough there just based on your say-so. But now we want documented proof. No more hiding the ball. And they won that fight. So that's a huge moment.
That's a big, that's a valid point, Bill. That's an example of, I think, the conservative movement and in this case, the conservative blogosphere using their leverage to basically sink a nominee, someone who had a very thin paper trail, who was basically a loyalty, just picked out of loyalty to Bush or an affinity from Bush, and saying, no, this isn't enough. And there's a lot of stuff that people on the right and conservatives have done that I think was kind of ridiculous, or things like the mosque, the fight over the mosque, the 9/11 mosque thing, which just, I was never keen on that. It just always, there was something about it. And I don't know if I was right or wrong, but the Harriet Miers thing, I think, was clearly an example where the right was right. And I think Alito is a great justice and credentialed, intellectual, and I also think solid in his philosophy. So that's one victory for us with a lot of mistakes along the way.
But your point about McConnell, and McConnell said literally the day Antonin Scalia died,
within an hour, according to Politico, within an hour, he made the announcement.
He said, "We are not going to fill this seat," and that was a gambit. You could not know at that
I thought
moment.
it was a mistake. My theory is, no, let's let this play out. Let's
Mhm.
toy kind of, we can always vote against the nominee,
Mhm.
but but I give him credit. That was a ballsy gambit, and I would not have done it. And I think as of now, we'll see if they do court packing. But like as of now, I think that it worked out brilliantly, and I think Mitch McConnell deserves more credit than anybody. If and there've been a lot of people along the way who've been fighting this battle. But I think Mitch McConnell probably is at the top of the list.
And he made the correct calculation that you could do that. I mean, Democrats thought at the time, I thought at the time, that that would look so beyond the pale that it would hurt you come election day. And clearly, it's not that Republicans had a gangbusters 2016. Trump didn't win the popular vote, but
Yeah.
obviously won where he needed to win. Didn't get the Democratic base energized in response. Uh,
But what it
and
did, what McConnell's move did was it took a lot of people like me who were conservatives who didn't like Trump, but we've been told our whole lives that the most important thing is the Supreme Court. And it made the election was no longer about Trump versus Hillary.
well, and Trump did this too. I mean, literally within days of effectively becoming the nominee in May, that was when he put out his list of judges that the pool he would choose from,
No,
which was never
I think he put out a preliminary list on the way to winning the nomination. I think that
right.
was
But May was after the Indiana primary, where it was effectively locked down.
mm,
Um, and you still had conservatives at that point who were not into Trump. They were Cruz people.
yeah,
Particularly evangelicals, they were Cruz people, and clearly the message got to Trump: "Hey, you got to bring this party together, and this is how you do it. You just
right.
put it out there
This
that you're
was
going
the
to
one
vote."
issue that Trump has defied a lot of conservative orthodoxy and a lot of sacred cows on the right, and it hasn't hurt him, right? But this was the
Well,
one he did not try to buck up against, right? I mean, there was worries because Donald Trump had been pro-choice. He had said pro-choice things. Hell, he could have picked his sister to be a Supreme Court justice. That would have been like part of his MO. And yet he did stick to the script on this one. Apparently he figured that this was the one issue that you couldn't.
well, and the combination of what McConnell did and what Trump did in essentially the first half of 2016, paying off in November, showed you could play to the base. You could play to the right wing base on judges and not lose the middle because they didn't care enough. Not necessarily the middle wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, but they didn't care enough.
But Trump's big
And
deficiency, of course, was, and this is beating a dead horse here, but Trump was great at bringing in new people and he was great at exciting people who just loved him. But he did have this deficiency of people like me who might not have voted at all, or like I didn't vote at all in 2016. And there's probably a lot of people like me who ended up holding their nose because here's what they knew. They knew A, Trump has a list of really good judges, and B, if he wins, he will get a minimum on day one. He will have a minimum of one Supreme Court pick, and that could be enough to overturn Roe. So Mitch McConnell shrewdly basically held a gun, to people like me and said, like, I'm holding this hostage. I'm going to shoot this hostage.
now the question becomes, is in winning those seats, but I mean, they basically pointed to people, it would appear, in Alito, in Gorsuch, in Barrett, and maybe also Kavanaugh, people who were so determined to overturn Roe v. Wade that they were going to push aside all other considerations. I mean, you actually go back and look at Alito's confirmation hearings. Some people look at. I mean, I think he made some comments that you could argue are lies and talking about precedent and reliance interest, for example. But there are other things that track very closely to what he put in the draft opinion. Um, talking about the difficulties in working through the Casey undue burden standards, for example. And while you give great deference to precedent, you still overturn things sometimes when necessary, and you can't let public opinion get in the way of that. These are people who were prepared to do this regardless of what the polls said.
Yeah. Which I think is appropriate. I mean, not only because it's principled, but because theoretically, if you're interpreting the Constitution, then it doesn't matter. It does not matter what public opinion says.
Well, I don't want to have that whole debate right now. But will Republicans regret appointing people who were so rigid and so determined that they did this so quickly that it caused a backlash that undid the project?
Yeah.
I mean, that
you say so quickly. It's 50 years. It reminds me of the movie Fletch, when he he's trying. He goes to somebody's doctor and to try to get privileged information about the patient, and so he's bullshitting the doctor, right? And he says, so and so died. And he says, it's such a shock that he went so sudden. And the doctor's like, he was in intensive care for 6 weeks. And Chevy Chase is like, but the very end was so sudden,
I mean, the point in time between Trump saying, I'm going to appoint judges that are going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and then having them overturn Roe v. Wade in 5 years' time.
And I think that also could lead to another negative possibility, which is that Donald Trump goes down in history as this great magical conservative leader who finally, no, Reagan couldn't get this done, Bush couldn't get this done, but Donald Trump, he changed. He's our savior. This will reinforce that. I mean, it's a totally bogus notion, mind you, but it doesn't matter because it
is it bogus?
It is bogus. So number one, Mitch McConnell deserves. So it's like saying, Ronald Reagan solely won the Cold War. Like, okay, it's actually a bad analogy because I think Ronald Reagan did a lot more to win the Cold War than Trump did to overturn Roe. But also, you're standing on the shoulder of a lot of other people, right? For a 50-year struggle or the 60-year struggle. So that's number one. Number two, I think Mitch McConnell, as I've laid out, actually had a lot more to do with it. I believe that any Republican who was on the stage in 2016 would have nominated. See, because of the conservative, the conservative kind of infrastructure that we built with the Federalist Society, the conservative legal community, we had gotten to a point where names like Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh were not radical. They were mainstream. I think Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz would have certainly picked, or Jeb Bush would have picked those judges. It's not just, it's not like Donald Trump, there's a theory that Donald Trump is the only guy who would have moved.
We had in previous Republican presidents. I mean, look, Ronald Reagan did Sandra O'Connor first, then Scalia. He wanted to ratchet up. He went O'Connor, Scalia to Bork, and then of course he couldn't get Bork, and then had to settle, for Kennedy. So he wanted to get there, but he didn't get there. He didn't start off right away with the hardest right judge he could find. H.W. Bush goes Souter first, then Thomas. Bush Jr. wanted Roberts, then Myers, and then it had to go with Alito. So, I mean, there's always been this argument that at the upper levels of the Republican Party, they didn't want to actually catch the car. They didn't want to really overturn Roe v. Wade. So they weren't that committed. So maybe you do someone who was very conservative, but then someone else maybe, not so. And Trump.
Well, there did used to be within the Republican coalition, there used to be a country club set in the establishment that actually wasn't pro-life. But now, Bill, I'm considered the rhino. So things have changed in the party. And I would say that, look, it's not really fair to compare it's not really fair to compare these things. Reagan didn't have Reagan as an example. Reagan couldn't look. I guess the problem started, with like maybe Nixon's nominations, but through the conservative legal community and the legal establishment and like the Federalist Society, what's the group? Confirmation, Judicial Confirmation Network or whatever they're called. Like these groups didn't exist until after we saw what happened with like Bork and Thomas. That's when we created this infrastructure. So we got smarter along the way. So Donald Trump benefited from the fact that we had learned lessons from what happened with Reagan and what happened with Bush. So I just think it's unfair to credit Trump, but he will be credited, right? Because it's like if you're president when the economy is great, you get credit. If you're president when it's bad, you get blame. And so I think Trump will get an inordinate amount of credit that he doesn't deserve. He'll be considered the most pro-life president in American history by a lot of people on the right. It's BS, but he will be. Bill, can I float? Let me float an idea.
Yeah.
We've been talking now. I feel like Arlo Guthrie. We've been talking now for 50 minutes in Alice's restaurant. There's a couple things we could do. One, we could keep going and talk for another half hour about Ohio and about West Virginia. Two, we could stop now, make another video about those things, about the elections, and we could post it either on YouTube in a day or two. That might get stale, or we could put it on our Patreon pages, only exclusively available to supporters. What do you think we should do? Do we give it? Do we give them another half hour, or do we make this privileged?
I think I'm concerned about my work schedule later in the week, so okay. I think we should do about 10 to 15 minutes now.
Okay.
And we can think about doing, special bonus things for later shows.
Well, let's just say in the future that may happen. And so people should go to patreon.com/Bill Scher or, because either one would get you in to bonus content, patreon.com/Matt Lewis, and you'll be invited into the parrot room, as it were, for privileged information. Bill,
is there a copyright on parrot room?
I think a real capitalist would have monetized this. But let's move to elections then, because we could talk Ohio and then preview West Virginia. What was your take on J.D. Vance winning in Ohio the Senate nomination?
I mean, obviously, there are a lot of times I think Trump takes credit he doesn't deserve, that he endorses people who are already at the front of the parade and tries to run up to, get in front of the parade. This is a clear-cut case. J.D. Vance was going to lose, and Trump made him win, period.
Well, I don't know if it's that clear-cut. J.D. Vance was...
He was down the polls before, he was up in the polls after.
True. Probably going to lose, and ended up winning.
Now... I've seen some people on Twitter saying, who are these idiots that thought Trump didn't have, a stranglehold on the party? This should surprise nobody. But let's remember there are other cases where he hasn't been able to work magic. He abandoned Mo Brooks in Alabama because his endorsement wasn't working out.
Brian Kemp in Georgia.
Right, I mean, it looks like he's going to lose in Georgia in the Purdue race.
Kemp is going to win. Purdue's going to
It's even possible that Georgia's Secretary of State could survive that primary. Yes. The polls there are very close.
The guy who dropped the dime on Donald Trump, because this is the guy that Trump tried to say, maybe you could help me find an extra 1,000 votes, or whatever.
So I think it is way too soon to declare the party is 100% under Trump's thumb at this point. And even J.D. Vance, mind you, didn't win with like 70% of the vote. It was like 30-something.
Okay, fair point. But I would also point out that the other people, there was only one guy, Dolan, who was not a hardcore Trumper. So if you add up all the Trumpy candidates, so now we're talking, you're talking Josh Mandel, and if you add up all of them, you're talking about like 70 at least 70% of the
Well,
election.
sure. I mean, clearly Ohio has a Trumpist
Yeah.
base. But the Mandel ads at the tail end were like, what's Trump thinking? JD Vance is a fraud. Who told him to do Vance? Mandel's the real Trump guy. So it was like Mandel's running as a moderate. He's still running as a Trumpist, populist,
I do think,
bigoted
though, that
candidate.
Josh Mandel, who was also endorsed by the Club for Growth, this became a big schism. Trump is now very mad at David McIntosh, head of the Club for Growth, for sticking with Josh Mandel. So Mandel was Trumpy in the sense that he sort of is a jerk. He's very blustery, but Josh Mandel was also in many ways, he was like a Mitt Romney guy. He was sort of more of an establishment Republican, but Trumpy temperamentally. I think the difference here is that JD Vance is part of a different sort of thing. He has a Josh Hawley, Peter Thiel, nationalist, populist philosophy. And so I think Tucker Carlson-esque as well. So I think that in a way, JD Vance is more dangerous if you're concerned about the nationalism. Trump existed. Donald Trump had a few core beliefs, like he tended to be a protectionist. That was consistent. But by and large, Trump was about Trump, and it was chaotic. And he brought in a lot of establishment Republicans because he didn't really have an infrastructure, and there really wasn't a coherent philosophy. And I think what's happening on the right is that they're kind of reverse engineering now, and they're grafting a philosophy onto Trumpism. And I think the election of JD Vance, which the nomination, which will probably lead to the election.
Well, we should talk about that,
right? Because there's a Democrat who won last night as well, and he's not AOC.
He's definitely not AOC. I mean, and his ad right out of the box was JD Vance left Ohio for San Francisco to make millions as an investment banker, investing in companies that profit from globalization and free trade. Tim Ryan has been running, anti-China ads. I've gotten some people on the left mad that they think that they're racist. He is playing hard to that Ohio working class populist electorate. And he's someone who has been elected in Ohio for a very long time.
I saw an ad. I don't know if you saw the one, Bill, where he's throwing darts. He's like at a bar throwing darts, and the messaging was great. I mean, he's playing the blue collar populist card very well. The question is, does it matter? Is it enough? If you're a Democrat in Ohio in this day and age, and you have a look and feel like a Joe Manchin, authentic, regular guy vibe, and you say all the right things, does it matter? Is it enough? I don't know.
Well, look, Ohio is, I would say, a light red state. I mean, it's not pink, but it's not the reddest. It's not Alabama. I think Trump won by 8 in the second time around. I think that was I can't remember if that was more or less than the first time. Probably around the same. But it has at the same time a track record of electing, I would say, pretty bland politicians. I mean, Mike Dewine won his primary again, less than 50%, but he won.
Yeah, he beat Jim Renacci, who, second loss for him, former congressman. My wife worked for him briefly at one point. But that's an example of where is there a bigger establishment name than Dewine? I mean,
Dewine he's a survivor, man.
Yeah,
he's been knocked up and knocked down and come back a million times.
By the way, look, I'll forget if I don't say this. There was another race. So my wife was working on a race in Ohio. I think it's Ohio 9. My wife was a fundraising consultant for like a woman running there, or like a state senator. And the whole time I'm hearing about this other opponent. So there were these two people running for the nomination, but there was some guy that was described to me as like a gadfly who had like a Trump tattoo, or he did something crazy, like he wrote Trump's name in his field. He was like a farmer. That guy won, actually. There's a headline here: man who painted Trump's face on lawn could be headed to Congress. That guy who didn't raise very much money, but what he did was he went to Mar-a-Lago all the time. He went to events at Mar-a-Lago, other people's events, to try to talk to Trump. Trump gave him a shout out at a rally, and he took the candidate. His name's J.R. Majewski. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
He took that shout out and put it on an ad, and he won the race. So that's
Now, did Trump endorse Vernucci against Dewine?
Renacci. No, Trump did
Renacci.
not. Trump did not endorse in that race. However,
Okay.
I think Renacci was much more of a Trumpy candidate, and Dewine is like a consummate establishment Republican, right? So it's weird. Now, who knows? If Trump had endorsed Renacci, maybe he wins, but he did not pull the trigger on that one.
So Renacci touted his endorsement from Trump in 2018 in bid to unseat Wine.
Yeah, I think he was implying that he was endorsed this time,
right.
but not.
But anyway, it's a place where Dewine has won, where Rob Portman has won, where Sherrod Brown has won. There is a track record of picking people. I mean, working class. I mean, Rob Portman, I wouldn't say working class, but people who have their nods to working class populism.
John Kasich's dad was a postman.
John Kasich, right. So I don't think it implausible. I've not even seen a poll. I'm not making predictions, but Tim Ryan can say, hey, I'm Ohio to the core. I'm a regular, normal Ohio guy. This fraud left the state. He said he's a celebrity. He goes to the Washington cocktail parties. He did a movie with Hollywood. That has potential. So I just don't think you can declare the race over just based on the tint of the state and the letter after the name. The JD Vance is not a candidate without flaws. There are attack openings for Ryan to exploit.
That would be interesting, and it could happen. Stranger things have happened. Let's turn to West Virginia quickly, where I'm sitting right now in West Virginia and the Eastern Panhandle. This is I have a lot of ties to this, Bill, because in 1998, I managed the race of a guy named Alex Mooney, who at the time was 26 years old, running for state senate in Maryland. And we ended up winning. When I say I managed the race, I did everything from cleaning his car to driving him to writing his speeches. It wasn't glamorous. But 4 years later, my wife is working for Bob Smith in New Hampshire. Bob Smith hires a guy named Corey Lewandowski to be the campaign manager. My wife says, I'm out of here. Comes back to the area, and my wife ends up managing Mooney's re-election in 2002, which is a very high-profile race. Mooney ends up winning that race by about 10 points. She was a more traditional manager. She actually basically ran the campaign, literally. So then Mooney goes on to lose subsequently, I think a couple terms later. He loses re-election in Maryland. He becomes the Maryland Republican Party chairman. Now, remember, my wife is actually from West Virginia. I actually went to Shepherd College, now university in West Virginia. So I had West Virginia ties. As far as I know, Alex Mooney didn't have any. But he moves to West Virginia, manages to get elected to Congress, and he's now my congressman. But because West Virginia is losing population, there are now two incumbent Republican congressmen facing off in a primary election on May 10th. One is Alex Mooney. The other is a guy named David McKinley. And I think the smart money is probably on Mooney. But, McKinley's...
Mooney is Trump endorsed, right?
Mooney is Trump endorsed. Now, this is funny too, Bill.
Because McKinley is Manchin endorsed.
Yeah. This is funny because in 2002, when my wife ran Mooney's race in Maryland, I still have all these pictures. We basically tied Mooney to Bob Ehrlich, who's kind of an establishment, moderate Republican. So there were all these signs, Ehrlich Mooney, everywhere you go. Ehrlich Mooney. And Mooney's done the same thing with Trump. So there are bumper stickers and signs out here, Trump Mooney. In fact, I think the 4x8 yard signs, or not yard signs, but the 4x8 signs I see is a picture of Mooney and Trump together. So Mooney's really playing up that endorsement. But as you mentioned about a week ago or a few days ago, Joe Manchin, because remember, Mooney's attacking McKinley because McKinley supported the bipartisan infrastructure deal. And Mooney's attacking that and saying that was betrayal or whatever. Obviously, that was supported by the two senators from West Virginia. And Joe Manchin, who's very popular out here, is endorsing McKinley. Both are endorsed by the West Virginia Right to Life group. Obviously, McKinley has more roots in the state. He's actually from West Virginia, unlike my congressman and the attorney general here. But Mooney has that Trump endorsement, and Mooney also represents. I'm sorry. Last point. McKinley, I think, represents a larger geographical part of the new district, but Mooney represents the population area where I live. So I think my money, if I had to bet, I think I bet on Mooney, but who knows?
There's no polling, right?
Well, there are conflicting polls, and the latest is that Mooney released an internal poll that was created by Public Opinion Strategies, which is a very respected Republican firm, showing him up
but still internal.
It's an internal poll, so you have to be skeptical, but it showed him up by 20 points. But there have been other polls that showed McKinley winning.
Also internal?
Winning narrowly. I think the other polls were I shouldn't say. I don't know for sure.
Okay.
But let's just say that the polling has not been consistent. If I were betting, I would probably bet on Mooney, but like it wouldn't surprise.
I also assume none of this polling happened since Manchin cut an ad.
Yes.
Where it's Manchin to the camera saying, "I killed Build Back Better because it wasn't good for West. I couldn't explain it to West Virginia." And now I'm back in McKinley because he's going to do good things for West Virginia. I'm not quoting verbatim. And every poll I've seen, Manchin's numbers in West Virginia are great. I mean, he barely won re-election in 2018. It was very, very close. But his approval now is ahead of where he was on election day in 2018.
Because he's become enemy number one to AOC and the squad, and he stood up to Biden.
But it's not even just being a performative antagonist. He delivered. He delivered a bill that I assume West Virginia likes. They want infrastructure. West Virginia's never been averse to getting money for public works projects.
But see, that's the interesting point, right? Mooney is basing his campaign on attacking the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And this is an area where I believe the Club for Growth and Trump are on the same page. West Virginia historically has loved pork. I mean, this is a state that had Robert C. Byrd, the king of pork. And can you win based on being against pork? That would speak to how things have changed, but also the district that I live in, Bill. People hear West Virginia and they think, but I'm telling you, man, I'm 8 miles from Loudoun County, like one of the richest counties in America. Like people don't realize how cosmopolitan some of it is out here, depending on what roadhouse you happen into.
So this is another test of how much power Trump really does have in the party. So JD Vance is one data point. It's not the only data point. That we will have more as this primary season goes along. Number one, and just to circle back to the general election, I mean, there's two questions about Trump's power. One, can he dictate who are the candidates that the party fields? Does he have that much control over the internal workings of the Republican Party, number one? And two, does he pick good candidates that help them win elections in November? If there are a bunch of Trump won nominees and they blow winnable races, that's going to, I mean, in West Virginia, it's, there's no chance Republicans going to lose the House general. But there are other places where maybe they would. So there's a lot left to be said about Trump standing in the party that aren't going to be settled after one primary race is done.
Indeed. But again, don't be a hater on horse race commentary and punditry, rank punditry. So, Bill, we're about 1 hour, 9 minutes. I think people have gotten their money this week. What do you think?
That's true. Always good to talk to you, even in our new DMZ digs on the Matt Lewis YouTube channel.
Assuming that this actually posts live and there are no major technological glitches, I'm going to declare it a success. I would recommend that people go to patreon.com/BillScher or patreon.com/Matt Lewis and support what we do. I would also ask people to subscribe to youtube.com/Matt Lewis and you will be alerted when we get whenever we post, and it could be they're emergency episodes. So you could do that, and if you follow on Twitter at DMZ Show, you'll be notified on Twitter. But let me say, I'm this close to 2,000 YouTube followers, or
Wow.
whatever they are, subscribers. So go to youtube.com/Matt Lewis, subscribe, and watch us here every time we talk.
All right. Till next time.
All right. See you, Bill.